my word, lean to that.
Right. Okay.
As a prefix to anything, I would say, not necessarily change management.
It's around basically two terms, as you said, right? So it's about optimizing the value perspective, right? Value proposition in a given context. It essentially is achieved through waste elimination or minimization, right? You
True.
try to control the waste around what you are doing, and then of course what it does is optimize the value that you are trying to deliver. Change management is a big topic, right? And
True.
it's one of the challenging things that we are trying to tackle as organizations, teams, and individuals. So, according to your observations, Sarika, what are the top two challenges in managing change that you have faced?
Sure. No, that's a fantastic question. And I think there's enough evidence out there to say what I'm about to say.
Mhm.
And the first and most important is what you'll hear anybody say, oh, they are resisting change. So it's essentially resistance to change that I think would be the most typical challenge that most people will come up with when implementing change,
Hmm.
which is why we say it's the approach to change management that matters. And that brings us back into our core topic for today. So going back, I would say resistance to change is one of the key challenges. And then secondly, I would say probably the way it is termed in most reports, and even if you look at, version one, agile reports and all of those state of surveys, etc., they'll probably term it as management support or some such. But essentially, the way I would see it is alignment with management. That's the second biggest challenge, I would say, from a change perspective, as much as you would see it in whatever you call as change. It could be an agile transformation, digital transformation, no matter what change you're driving. I would say these, in my experience too, I've seen as like the top two challenges.
Excellent, excellent. This pretty much in line with the last discussion with one of the lean consultants from America, right? Karen Martin, you
Okay,
remember Karen Martin, who wrote the book Value Stream Mapping?
sure.
So her stance was exactly the same thing, right? So
Okay.
it's the leadership alignment. Actually, the second point that she brought is the prioritization, right?
Mm.
So a lot of companies struggle picking up the right priorities. I mean, they start implementing change, but they pick up the wrong priority.
This is the Agile Wisdom Podcast.
What is lean change management to you?
Hmm. Maybe let me not answer that question independently. Let's stitch it back to how you've been asking the questions, right? So let's go back
Right.
to the point of the two challenges. So, resistance to change and leadership alignment. I think my question would be for us to think, why do we get leadership resistance, change resistance? Why do we
Hmm.
not get leadership alignment? And the answers to those questions actually is the answer to what lean change management is. Traditionally, if you see, change management is always thought to be, step by step, linear, and it is basically done in an ivory tower by a team that is designated to be a change team or whatever. And they go, they build the plan, and then they throw the change at the whole organization, department, etc., whatever the scope of change is.
Hmm.
Now, in today's world, things are complex. There is no step-by-step procedure that's going to work. We know, if we even think about the Kinevin framework, we are working in the complex domain. There is no best practice that I can start to, put out and say, hey, this is the step-by-step guide to your change, and every change will work the same. Well, think about the pandemic and how we are all still grappling with it, right? um, Maybe it started with chaos and now it's in complex, I don't know. But the point here is that change works best when you co-create it with the people who have to live with the day-to-day consequences of the change. So if I
Hmm.
have a team or the organization that is going to be changed, and if I'm able to co-create my change with those people, I will, one, get less resistance. I will get into meaningful dialogue that will lead to more alignment and less resistance. Again, I will get into a better dialogue to allow people to understand why they are needing to change. And well, if people want to opt out, they will opt out, and I should allow them to opt out. So if I had to define what lean change means to me, I would say it hinges on a couple things. One, you cannot force people to do anything. The
Hmm.
only thing you can do is to react to people's reactions to change and use that as feedback for yourself and your change strategy of how you should drive that change. So that's one.
Hmm.
Second, I would say co-create the change with those impacted by the consequences of that change. Because very clearly, people who write the plan don't fight the plan. That's what Jill Forbes also says. And it's pretty clear. If people are involved in designing the change with you, they're not going to fight back that change, which is great. We see that in the agile world, right? You allow people to choose their teams, their projects, and you build in more accountability, etc. So to sum up, I would say lean change is not a linear prescriptive model. It's a very innovative model, which kind of allows you to navigate change in the complex world today. It is feedback driven approach to change with customer at the center. And when I say customer, it is all those people who are impacted by the change or by the consequences of that change. Also, I like to bring in what Jürgen Apollo, the creator of Management 3.0, calls as the Mojito method, right? And he says, take the best out of different practices and create your own. And I would look at lean change also from that lens, Niro, and say, what lean change does is it takes the best from agile, from change management, from HR, it and organizational design, and then you add dashes of brain science, complexity thinking, lean startup, and social change theory, and that's lean change management for you.
What key differences you see between lean change management and traditional change management?
Hmm. Okay, so going back to a couple points also I mentioned.
Sure.
So the very first one would be traditionally change is pretty much done as a separate team in like an ivory tower or wherever else, right? You just work in a silo. Now
Hmm.
it starts with that, and then that team is responsible for things like stakeholder mapping, risk mitigation plans, rolling out change readiness assessments. There is a project manager who is driving tasks and making sure things happen. And there is like a standard operating procedures playbook. Do this as step one, step two, step three, whatever that is, right? No matter what framework you're following, it doesn't matter. Then you test out that change, roll it out, and see if it works. And if it doesn't work, you tweak it and roll it out, and then close that.
Hmm.
Uh, the new approach to change management, I would say, or let's call it modern change management. First of all, I think it starts by co creation. You do not create a plan in a silo because by the time you come out with the plan might be obsolete, right? It
Hmm.
doesn't work in today's world. So
Hmm.
you've got to co create the plan with the people who are impacted by the plan. And this is more done through facilitated conversations by people being problem solvers. So the whole approach and mindset has started to change. We are also validating assumptions much sooner, just like what we do in our agile projects, right? That's the best you can take out of those
Hmm.
approaches from that mindset. So validate your assumptions as soon as you can, build in those action items, build in the feedback loops that can be set up as an adaptable process that the team works with on a day-to-day basis, because you need that content, constant continuous feedback coming in and feeding back into your plan to know whether you're moving in the right direction
Hmm.
and whether that is what your team wants to achieve. And lastly, I would say probably the new approach also says give your teams the freedom and autonomy they need to move in that direction, right? Because that is what will, I would say, if you refer back to the innovation diffusion curve, where you talk of the innovators, early adopters, late adopters, and the laggards, that will create your early adopters, and they will then influence change to the next set of adopters. You do not have to do that as a change agent because change has got to viral out,
Hmm.
and you cannot keep selling change. And that is why the balance between selling and co-creation is needed. If I had to just keep pushing change to you, I'm almost always trying to sell it. selling change will not work. But if I co-create the change with you and say, yeah, it's not perfect. Yeah, let's not try and achieve level 5, but maybe level 2 works for now. And then we'll see how we want to navigate to level 3. And is level 3 the correct level? And if I do this together with you, that's more impactful because you'll be with me and I will not be throwing change at you. There's a whole difference in the language itself, right? Of how
Hmm.
change is evolving or emerging. So that's how I would see the difference between traditional and modern change management, let's say.
Now, okay, so let me ask you. I call it a kind of a very strange question, but I
Okay.
hope I hope you're gonna do the justice. Now, so when we mention the term lean, right? In Sri Lankan context, I think it's the same thing in your community as well. It means Lean Six Sigma, right? Lean,
Okay.
oh, Six Sigma, right? This is what the companies are mostly familiar with, and we associate the term lean with Lean Six Sigma just by default, right? So this is kind of a confusion that I had when I started looking into this particular term. I was wondering whether should I do Lean Six Sigma as well, right?
Uh-huh.
Then I realized it's just a model framework, right? So my question is this, right? This is not a term that people would have seen under the lean umbrella, right?
Yes.
So, example, when you say lean, there are various tools being introduced. Example, even Kanban, right, comes from lean. Then value stream mapping, right? Then Lean Six Sigma, right? Lean startup. Now, this could be a kind of a very unfamiliar term that people see under lean, the term lean. What is lean about lean change management?
It's a brilliant question. And let me answer it like this. So, prefixing lean to change management, and I will want to, I think most of us here are agile coaches or, we are aware of the agile world. So, let me give you an analogy that resonates. We call something as a minimum viable product,
Hmm.
right? And what do we
Yeah.
mean by that? It's the thinnest slice of a product that I can put out into production public,
Yeah.
right? Which is most valuable to a customer. Exactly the same way, I would say lean change management stands for the minimum viable change that I can put out into the organization and experiment with that. So, exactly like the vertical slice of change, rather than traditionally, you have the whole change plan, and until the whole change is put out into the organization, which could take 10 months or 2 years, whatever, you don't get to see results. But
Hmm.
in this approach of today, I would probably chop down my feedback approaches because this is a feedback driven approach. I
Right.
would put that out as, okay, let me just take the thinnest slice of change and let's try a lean coffee. You know what? Let's
Hmm.
give it a week's time. And
Hmm.
then let's retrospect and figure out whether our change worked or not. So I
Right.
apply that same lean minimum viable change mindset to
Hmm.
lean change management. And we call it MVC, minimum viable change, because then that
Right.
resonates in a very similar fashion because it does take the best out of agile too, right?
Right. Right.
Does that quantify your question better now?
Yes, yes, yes. I like the term. That's a term that I can keep using now. So because MVP is pretty much the core, one of the core concepts of agility, right? And that makes a lot of sense in most of the cases.
Yes, and I think what ends up happening, Nero, is people still think that they want to deploy. So if you're doing an agile transformation, oh, we should wait for this whole team to complete everything. Why
Hmm.
wait for the whole team to complete that? Why don't we just work with their sprints and see how they are moving, right? Because that's how quickly you want to check whether your approach to change is working or not, no matter whether the team is in IT or if it is HR, marketing, sales, depending on where you're executing your piece of change.
Now, one thing is this, right? So we know that you have been training and coaching with lean change management for so many years, right? By now, the question is, what does your typical lean change management training look like? What does it contain?
Okay, good question. So essentially, we look at a couple of modules, but let me tell you about the structure, which is because today is the online world. So I think it is better to first talk about the structure online because we have obviously not just taken an in-person workshop and made it online. It doesn't work like that, right? You can't just transpose something and put it online. The experience is very different. So first of all, I think based on our experience last year, we think the best approach to this workshop online is to
Hmm.
do 6 sessions across 6 weeks.
Right.
And these 6 sessions are not more than 2 hours each, because that is the maximum amount of time our brain can accept learning, which also has a 10-minute break in the middle. So,
Right.
after 50 minutes, take a 10 minutes break, and then we continue the rest of the session. So, in terms
Right.
of structure, it is 2 hours session across 6 weeks, so 6 sessions, right?
Hmm.
Now, there is some pre work associated with it. The good thing about this is, and that's the feedback I've been getting now from participants, is that it kind of gives them a feeling that they are also getting coached in the process, because what we do is we ask you to bring a real change challenge. So do
Right.
not come to the workshop just, hey, I want to get a check in the box. That's not what we look for, right?
Hmm.
Because then we are not delivering value. So if
Hmm.
you have a change problem that you're struggling with, bring that change, and then across the 6 sessions, apply whatever you are learning to
Right.
that change. And that is also what you submit at the end of the 6th day as an
Hmm.
assignment, right?
Right.
And it's not to me, it's really to yourself, because then if a lot of people come together with their teams, so the whole team submits it and they can take that back and they can say, oh, you know what, we can implement this whole thing now. But
Hmm.
what people also do is, let's say you learned a technique called perspective mapping in the 4th session with me. You apply perspective mapping to whatever change you're working on,
Right.
and go back with your teams, talk about it, try and apply it for a week, and then you come back and you share your learning. So that's why they
Hmm.
get the coaching feeling, because you come back, share your experience with everybody else on the call in that training session and with me as a trainer in it, and we discuss. And then, of course, it does lead to like a 15 minutes of a micro coaching session where you discuss more options and possibilities. So
Right.
it's kind of a mix between a coaching and a training session, the way it is structured today. That's one.
Right.
And the times, like I said. So that's the second piece. A third, we try and cover as much in depth as we can. And of course, we do like to distribute this book for people in India and neighboring countries. I am happy to courier this book to people now that we have postal services functioning. Otherwise, yeah. And then you, of course, are able to also get Jason's second book, which is the Change Agility book. That
Right.
serves as a supplement, I would say, to every module that we look at.
Right.
Our first module really starts with the marriage between agile and change management. We look
Right.
at what that means, because some people who would come to the training are experts in change, some are experts in agile, some are a mix of both, or some
Right.
are very novice, right? So you've got to be fair to the whole audience. So as a trainer, then of course I put together what works well for both sets of people. And yeah, so that's our first session. And then, of course, we dive into really the lean change cycle. You start from where you are, you capture insights, we look for options, and we drive experiments. And the learning from the experiments is then fed back into the insights.
Hmm.
So all our sessions are structured around this whole cycle. So you experience the whole cycle. I teach practices that lean change comes up with, perspective mapping. We talk about canvases. You create your own canvases. We talk about the ecosystem of change, what you can influence, what you cannot influence, what's
Hmm.
directly influenceable, what's not. So we talk about all those, including the lean coffee, culture hacking, and all the practices that come as a part and parcel of lean change management. And then the second last session, and I like to highlight that, dives into the social change theory, where we talk about people. Because, like I
Right.
said in the beginning, lean change does include dashes of brain science, complexity thinking, lean startup, and social change theory. So, if you see, this looks like a lean startup cycle, right? The build, measure, learn piece comes out, and it's a total map, right?
Hmm.
You will do that, and you'll start to sense that when you start the workshop. because this is a very much that cycle. But when you get into the people part of it, and that is one of the key things lean change hinges on, right? When I tell people, you can't force people to do anything. But I've been given a mandate by management to do this. This team has to go agile in 6 months. And I'm like, okay, but if I, can you really make it happen in 6 months? Because I might be willing to change in 6 months or lesser. My colleague might take longer, but that's how we function. So to understand the brain science behind change, to understand why people behave the way they do. So we do bring in those theories. So people as change agents or coaches or leaders, we understand the theory behind that. So that I think is really important, because then you look at resistance as a positive word and not as a negative.
Excellent. I love it. Yeah. So I'm lucky that we are launching it together with you. So for the country, so I would be one of the very first participants as well. So
Looking forward to it.
yeah. So see, what you said is really valid, because whenever I'm being approached for any organization level, team level, agile coaching, right? The question they ask is not an agile specific question, right? Always their questions are, hey, how can we improve our efficiency? How can we improve our teamwork? How can we ensure that we deliver the results? So none of them are attached to any term like agile, or even for that matter lean, right? So as a coach, right, what happens is I need to have the right tool set with me so that I can drive the discussion such a way it makes sense uh, to the client, right, the organization.
Definitely.
That is where I actually see what you said is absolutely spot on, right? So you can drive the discussion in such a way, we don't put heavy processes, heavy recommendations to the customer, right? You start such a way, you keep this model in mind and then start introducing the changes, right, one by one. Yeah. So that's where I'm actually seeing a lot of relevance that people can consultants and change agents can start using what they will be learning here. So one more question on this regard, right? Now, in terms of the audience, Sarika, I just want to create a bit more clarity. So what is the typical audience that you get for these training sessions is kind of the question, right? uh, Also, just clarify, is it now, if you look at the project managers, agile coaches, as well as other people who are driving change, if you look at the leaders, right, so senior managers, uh, also, what about the other department heads and HR professionals? Is this program for all of them?
Oh, good question. So in short, the answer is yes, this program is for all the personas that you talked about, or all the profiles you talked about, for sure.
Right. Okay.
What participants have I been getting in the past? I think in the past 4 years now that I've been working or running training specifically on this. Um, I think HR professionals since last year, because I've been doing a lot of HR coaching and trainings anyway. So that has driven them to understand that, yes, it is definitely needed for HR. Agile coaches, it goes by default because, yes, you need more tools and practices in your kitty, to pull out when you have to drive change. So I see a lot of coaches now also pulling out things like lean coffee or force field analysis, and we drive all the, or culture hacking. I know a number of coaches in service companies in India, in Bangalore, actually. So
Right.
they've been using culture hacking, and I did that actually at a meetup too, just
Right.
because, I got the request from them and I was like, okay, it looks like that's working for you guys. So yes, I would say agile coaches, leaders, managers, department heads, change agents, if you come from the change area, organizational design professionals. I would say it's pretty relevant for almost anyone. But yeah, I don't see a lot of IT teams quickly jump onto this. So yeah, I would say maybe Scrum Masters, for sure. And yeah, HR professionals, I've been working now with marketing people, sales teams, actually completely to do end to end.
Right.
How do they implement lean change management in their approaches to work? So yeah.
Super. Yeah. Thank you for the clarification. So the
Sure.
last question I have for you is this. So I have heard about the podcast called Perspectives of Change. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Sure. So I think couple of things around that. So one, of course, the perspectives of change allows you as a change agent to keep in mind that your perspective is not the only perspective. And that is also the perspective that we talk about in change management, in lean change management, that
Hmm.
your perspective is not the only perspective. And you need to figure out as a change agent that you have to find different perspectives of the people involved in the change to nudge that change forward. That's really the mission and vision of that podcast. And of course,
Right.
we also pull off now. I pull that podcast also off Jason, who used to run the Lean Change podcast. So yes, these are now the same podcast under the umbrella of Perspectives of Change. And I like to stress on that because there's quite a lot of material in terms of what Jason has done in his interviews of people, what I've been interviewing people in the HR space and other spaces, right? Not necessarily just change, but other domains and other spaces. So yeah, if people would like to listen in, so just it's a free podcast. It's built for the community. Just go to perspectivesofchange.com. It takes you to SoundCloud, and yeah, you can follow that and listen into some good stories that Jason and I have there.
Love it. Okay. Perfect. Yeah, so that's pretty much the questions I have. So I would like to open the floor for any questions.
I would like to know whether when implementing digital transformation in organizations, especially in legacy organizations, uh, do you think that it is effective for consultants or someone outside the organization who understands lean change management or digital transformation uh, could work with the organization with the or consultant basically look at their systems, or would it be better, more effective for people within the organization itself to implement and kind of take the organization through this change when it comes to processes?
Yeah, it's a brilliant question, Jeremy, and I think that I can surely answer that because I've done both. Okay, I've been a consultant to organizations, and I have also run these things as being part as an employee of an organization. Um, and both have their pros and cons, right? There is no one best approach that this works over another. During the lean change sessions, we also talk of the waves of change. Now, for a consultant, when I talk about the waves of change, I think the best approach for a consultant would be to come in when the third wave of change or the fourth wave of change is happening, because you've had people before you who've come, done stuff, and maybe it didn't work. So at least you have some previous learnings to build over, and you're probably not the first one coming in. So in my approach, I think that approach works better for consultants. You being the first consultant in an organization probably doesn't give you that much success, if you have to look at it that way, if you're going in as a consultant to an organization. Now, nevertheless, if you're a consultant or an employee trying to approach change with lean change management or another change approach, I'll tell you my experience. I generally do not use change jargon or agile jargon. I like to use layman language when I'm talking to, whether it's employees or whether it's to consultants, vendors, customers, no matter what. Because the more jargon we bring in, I think the more confused people get. And they obviously then push back. And they're like, oh, but I want this model to be used. Why are you not using that model? So I kind of do away with the whole resistance piece by talking the language of whoever I'm talking to, right? So if you're a consultant, I would still say talk the one team mindset, and that works better. I don't use the change language there, but yeah, I would use lean approaches. I would probably use perspective mapping and not call it perspective mapping, and then say, hey, this is great, it's brought alignment. And then people would generally end up asking, was this like a tool or something that we could drag and drop in our, I'm like, yeah, it's called this, so why don't you try that? So I would say those approaches work. Also, I think one other point I would add to your question, Jeremy, is the mindset of the people. In terms of, if you're an employee, you are also bound by specific KPIs by the organization, or however the organization is structured. So your need to change or not change will be bound by those boundaries. And if you come in as a consultant, everything also then depends on the way your contract is structured. So I guess those pieces do bring the pros and cons that I'm talking about, and that would be very contextual. Does that help respond to your question?
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
Thank you. Because I know it can be challenging for consultants to kind of understand, and it takes probably longer time unless there is a team. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, maybe a team working within, along with the team that is working outside the combine, and basically work together. That could be effective.
True. And in all honesty, I mean, I've never been the third or fourth consultant always. I've always been the first one. And I'm like, oh my God, where am I headed with this, right? And then you are kind of setting the context to all change that will happen in the future of the organization. But yeah, in a couple cases, which have been rare, I've been the third and fourth consultant working with, like you rightly said, some teams that are already doing this. So with that, there is co-ownership with the organization. And that's probably the best approach to drive change with. Great question. Thank you.
So, Sarika Sajjad here. Thank you so much for MVC. I think that resonated quite well with us always having MVP in our mind. Something that I wanted to just ask you is, so generally with change, and this may not be with like a team implementing a change or something that has come from the top to be implemented, or as you said, that never works, and it has to be always like a co-creation. Something that I've always, not always at least, come across is like, when I see something that probably would improve the organization, or something that I need to drive a process, I might get the help of the leadership team or something, another team that will actually help drive this, but eventually it stagnates. The change stagnates, or it doesn't move forward after a certain point. So how can I overcome such situations, or what am I doing wrong, or what do I have to do in that sense?
Okay, it's yet another brilliant question. You're not doing anything wrong. Okay, it's the cycle that change takes. So there's always a cycle of the crests and the troughs. And when you say the change is stagnating, you are already in the trough. What's needed at that time is an intervention. You need something to break that stagnation. Otherwise, it just, and then people get uninterested, and it goes, at its own whatever pace that you might struggle. Oh my God, what am I doing wrong? Oh, nothing's happening. There's no change. In fact, I think that also then serves as an input, thinking again from a lean change perspective. I would feed that back and then question myself, what other options could be there? Do I need another intervention? Do I need to shake the organization with something different so that people, start thinking different? So I would just do that. In fact, that's where I would think things like culture hacking come into picture, and maybe a medium to a riskier hack would help. And something that will shake the organization a little for people to be like, whoa, okay, we should probably do something differently. Yeah.
Thank you for watching. For much more exciting, valuable videos, please do hit the subscribe button. May the force be with you.